The weight of gold and gilt, the hum of the projector was a familiar lullaby, a steady rhythm against the anxious thrum of my own heartbeat. My voice, calm and measured, filled the cavernous boardroom, detailing the structural integrity and aesthetic vision of the new Hudson Yards Tower. My slides, crisp and precise, mapped out the future, a testament to order and meticulously planned growth. My name is Cassidy Miller, and at 30, I was a rising star in New York's competitive architectural scene, building skylines, shaping futures. Yet beneath the polished exterior, the steel and glass facade, I presented to the world a fragile, almost translucent pane of glass barely contained the shattered remnants of my own past. A past I was still in many ways attempting to rebuild. 15 years ago, the future hadn't been a sleek skyscraper but a sun-drenched afternoon. The air, thick with the scent of pine and freshly cut grass, hung heavy over the picnic blanket spread near the old oak tree in Meadowbrook Park. I remembered the red checkered pattern vividly, the way Lily, my 7-year-old sister, had insisted on bringing her battered teddy bear Barnaby, who now lay propped against a basket of sandwiches. My brother Owen, then 13, was laughing, his usual quiet demeanor momentarily overshadowed by the joy of chasing a frisbee with our father Arthur. Mom Victoria, with her perfectly coiffed blonde hair and an infectious smile that rarely faltered, was arranging a fruit platter, humming a tune I couldn't quite recall now. We were the quintessential American family, a golden tableau bathed in the late afternoon sun. That was the last time. The drive home, a winding road through the Catskills, was always scenic. I remembered offering to drive that day. I had just gotten my learner's permit, full of the eagerness of a 15-year-old on the cusp of independence. My parents, indulging my enthusiasm, had let me take the wheel for a stretch, my father sitting beside me offering quiet instructions. Lily was in the back, singing along to the radio, her sweet, off-key voice, a melody of pure innocence. Owen was engrossed in a comic book. A deer, swift and sudden, had darted across the road. My foot, new to the pedals, had slammed the brake with too much force, the car swerving violently. The world had spun into a chaotic blur of metal, glass, and screams. I remembered the sickening crunch, the sudden impact, the feeling of being tossed like a rag doll. When the world finally stopped spinning, settling into a grotesque stillness, I was upside down, suspended by my seatbelt, the air thick with the smell of gasoline and something metallic, something like blood. My head throbbed a searing pain, but I was conscious a cruel gift. I heard Owen's terrified whimpers from somewhere in the back. My father was groaning. But there was no sound from Lily. Lily, I had called out, my voice raw, choked with dust and fear. Silence. I had unbuckled myself, my body screaming in protest, and crawled over the shattered seats past the mangled metal. Owen was trapped but seemed okay, his face streaked with tears and dirt. My father was slumped against the dashboard, bleeding from his head, but his eyes were open wide with shock. Then I saw her. Lily. She was lying unnaturally still, Barnaby clutched in her small hand, her usually bright eyes staring blankly at the crumpled roof of the car. There was a wound, small but devastating, on her temple. No movement, no breath. Just the profound, absolute silence of a child who was no longer there. I remembered Victoria, pulled from the wreckage by first responders, her face a mask of dazed horror, a deep gash on her forehead. When she saw Lily, a scream, guttural and primal, had ripped from her throat, echoing through the quiet woods. It was a sound that would haunt my nightmares for years, the sound of a mother's world ending. In the days that followed, shrouded in a fog of grief and guilt, I barely registered my own injuries. A broken arm, a concussion, a few stitches. My physical wounds healed faster than the gaping chasm in my chest. The police report cleared me, stating it was an unavoidable accident, a tragic confluence of circumstances. But for Victoria, it was never that simple. She never said the words, never overtly blamed me. But her eyes, whenever they met mine, held a coolness, a silent accusation that spoke volumes. It was as if I, the driver, had somehow failed to protect her, failed to protect Lily. And in her profound grief, she had never truly forgiven me. That implicit blame, that unspoken expectation, had become the bedrock of my existence. I had buried my own grief, my own trauma, deep beneath layers of resolute determination. I had made a silent vow to myself, a desperate plea to the universe. I would rebuild my family. I would make them whole again. I would carry the weight. My identity became inextricably linked to this unspoken mission, my purpose forged in the crucible of tragedy and a mother's unyielding, silent condemnation. Now, standing in front of seasoned executives, my presentation concluded, I felt a flicker of the old satisfaction. A polite applause, a few nods of approval. My managing partner, Mr. Henderson, said that it was excellent work, a true masterpiece of modern design. I offered a practiced smile, the kind that reached my eyes but didn't quite touch my soul. My apartment in Tribeca was a sanctuary of minimalist design, a testament to my philosophy of clean lines and uncluttered spaces. Every object had a purpose, every surface gleamed. It was beautiful, functional, cold. A sleek chrome coffee maker sat on a marble counter, but I rarely used it, preferring the hurried convenience of the office brew. Bookshelves lined with architectural tomes and art history texts replaced personal photographs. There were no mementos of Lily, no family pictures. I had purged them all years ago, believing that if I couldn't rebuild the past, I could at least control the present, carefully curate my environment to reflect the stark emotional landscape within me. The silence in my apartment was usually a comfort, a buffer against the world's demands. But sometimes, in the deepest hours of the night, it felt less like peace and more like a void. That night, the silence was abruptly shattered by the insistent trill of my phone. The caller ID glowed a name that always sent a ripple of tension through me, Mother. I let it ring twice, then answered, my voice carefully neutral. I greeted my mother. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. Her voice, refined and slightly theatrical, immediately launched into a list of directives. She said that she was calling to remind me of the annual Miller Family Gala next Saturday at the country club. She informed me that she had already arranged my schedule, telling me I absolutely had to be there. She mentioned something about an important potential investor for Owen's latest photography exhibit, someone she had personally invited to support his burgeoning talent. She then shifted effortlessly to her expectations for my attire, suggesting I avoid anything too architectural and opt for something soft and feminine. There was a new piece of art she wanted me to appraise for the foyer, a potential acquisition. She then reminded me that she had booked a facial for me the day before the gala and that my father was looking forward to discussing a small home improvement project with me. The call was a cascade of instructions, a meticulous orchestration of my life, leaving no room for my own input. There was no inquiry about my well-being, no mention of my successful presentation that day, just the relentless hum of her control. I listened, interjecting only with vague affirmations. I told her that I understood the importance of the gala and would make sure to attend. I promised to look into the art piece and talk to Father. My replies were automatic, a well-rehearsed performance of compliance. I knew deep down that challenging her would only lead to an exhaustive, emotionally draining argument, one I rarely had the energy to win. It was simply easier to agree to navigate around her demands to maintain the illusion of cooperation. After all, wasn't this part of my mission? To keep the peace, to keep the family together? The call ended as abruptly as it began, leaving a faint metallic taste in my mouth, like the aftermath of a small internal explosion. The Miller family mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut was a monument to old money and impeccable taste, a sprawling estate nestled among manicured lawns and ancient trees. It was the embodiment of the American dream, a gilded cage meticulously maintained. Every year, Victoria hosted the annual Family Gala, an event less about genuine connection and more about demonstrating the family's resilience, wealth, and most importantly, her own indomitable spirit in the face of tragedy. Walking through the grand double doors on the night of the gala, I was immediately enveloped by the familiar symphony of polite chatter, clinking champagne flutes, and the distant strains of a string quartet. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and blooming roses. Victoria, radiant in a sapphire gown, stood at the top of the sweeping staircase, greeting guests with the grace of a queen surveying her subjects. When she saw me, her smile widened, a beacon of approval. She announced that I looked simply stunning, my darling. She then introduced me to everyone as her eldest daughter, Cassidy, her strong daughter, the brilliant architect who was reshaping the New York skyline. She then draped an arm around Owen, who stood beside her, looking slightly uncomfortable in his tailored suit. She then introduced Owen as her talented artist and said his latest collection was truly breathtaking, a profound exploration of light and shadow. I offered a polite smile, nodding to the various aunts, uncles, and distant cousins who approached. Victoria's introductions were always a performance, a carefully curated narrative. I was strong, brilliant, the one who had overcome so much. Owen was talented, sensitive, the one who captured the beauty in the world. Lily, of course, was never mentioned except in the unspoken, lingering shadow that permeated our lives. Victoria had crafted a new family mythology, one of triumph over adversity, a testament to her own strength in guiding us through the darkness. And I unknowingly was a key player in this charade. Throughout the evening, I moved through the opulent rooms, engaging in superficial conversations, answering polite inquiries about my work, and deflecting subtle probes about my single status. My apartment might be cold, but at least it was honest. Here, everything was an act. I watched Owen, who was awkwardly trying to explain his art to a group of uninterested investors, their eyes glazing over with each artistic pronouncement. Victoria hovered, interjecting with overly effusive praise, making sure everyone understood that she was the driving force behind his career. The truth was, Owen's burgeoning talent was more of a passionate hobby generously funded by the family. More accurately, funded by me. My significant income didn't just support my upscale New York lifestyle. A substantial portion flowed directly into the family coffers. I paid for the exorbitant property taxes on the mansion, the maintenance of the sprawling grounds, the lavish parties Victoria insisted on hosting. I quietly covered the gaps in my father's seemingly robust retirement fund, which had been depleted by some ill-advised investments Victoria had pushed for years ago. And of course, I bankrolled Owen's art studio, his exhibitions, his art supplies, and even his occasional inspirational trips abroad, which usually amounted to him finding himself in various European cities without much artistic output. I justified it to myself every month as the automatic transfers left my account. This was my penance, my atonement. This was how I kept the family afloat, how I fulfilled my vow to rebuild what had been shattered. I truly believed that without my financial bedrock, the entire opulent facade and indeed the family itself would crumble. It was a business investment in the family's stability. I told myself, a fiction. I clung to protecting my heart from the deeper, more painful truth. I was still desperately seeking the absolution, the love, the acknowledgement that my mother had silently withheld for 15 years. I needed to be indispensable. I needed to be the one who fixed everything. Later in the evening, I found Owen lurking near the open French doors, a glass of untouched sparkling water in his hand, his gaze fixed on the moonlit garden. He looked overwhelmed, a familiar expression. His talent was real, a raw, intuitive eye for beauty, but he lacked the aggression, the self-promotion necessary to thrive in the art world. Or perhaps more accurately, he was stifled by Victoria's relentless micromanagement. "Rough crowd tonight?" I asked, gently joining him by the doors. He sighed, his shoulders slumping. He said that he felt like a show pony trotted out for Mom's amusement. He mentioned that the investors she had invited only wanted to talk about her charity work, not his photographs. His voice was laced with a quiet despair. He then confided that he was so tired of it all, of the pretense of Mom's constant interference. He had recently tried to explore a new style, something more raw and personal, but Mom had dismissed it as too dark and unmarketable, insisting he stick to his usual landscapes and still lifes the kind she approved of for the mansion. He said he felt like he was suffocating, that his art wasn't even his own anymore. My heart ached for him. Owen was a sensitive soul, easily bruised. I told him that his art was beautiful regardless of what anyone else said. I assured him that he was talented and that he would find his own voice in his own time. I promised him that I would always be there for him, that I would support him no matter what. He looked at me then, his eyes so much like lilies, filled with a fleeting gratitude. He said that he didn't know what he would do without me. That simple statement, a reflection of his vulnerability and dependence, fortified my resolve. It confirmed my role, my purpose. I was his protector, his anchor. If I wasn't there, who would be? Who would shield him from Victoria's suffocating embrace? Who would maintain this fragile balance? As the gala wound down and guests began to depart, the illusion of the perfect Miller family remained intact. Victoria beamed, accepting accolades for another successful event, another testament to her unwavering strength. Arthur, my father, offered me a fleeting, almost apologetic smile as he passed a man who had long ago retreated into the quiet, unprotesting background of our family drama. He simply said that it was good to see me. His usual pleasant neutrality, a skill he had perfected over decades, was as impenetrable as ever. I made my excuses and left, driving back to my solitary apartment in New York City. The city lights twinkled like distant, indifferent stars. The weight of the gold, the opulence, the carefully constructed perfection of the Miller family mansion felt heavier than any skyscraper I had ever designed. It was a weight I had willingly carried for 15 years, believing it was the only way to atone for a tragedy that wasn't my fault, to fulfill a vow I had made to a ghost. But as I unlocked the door to my own sterile sanctuary, a faint tremor of unease, a nascent crack in my carefully constructed emotional facade began to surface. Owen's words, his quiet despair, lingered in the air, a silent question mark against the backdrop of my mother's golden, suffocating embrace. The foundation, I realized, was not as solid as I had once believed. It was built on something far more fragile than steel and glass, a lie. And I was about to discover just how deep that lie ran. Echoes in the gilded cage. The Tribeca loft, usually my sanctuary, felt like a sterile prison cell that night. The quiet, once a comfort, now amplified the insistent whispers of doubt that had begun to penetrate my carefully constructed composure. Owen's words from the gala, his weariness, his suffocating feeling, his confession that his art was no longer truly his own replayed in my mind. They were a jarring counterpoint to Victoria's perfectly manicured narrative of his burgeoning talent, and they resonated with a deep, unsettling familiarity. Hadn't I too felt stifled? Hadn't my own passions often been bent to fit a mold not of my making? The irony was a bitter pill. I, the architect of towering structures, felt increasingly trapped within the architecture of my own family. I paced the polished concrete floors, the cool surface doing little to quell the rising heat of my agitation. I looked out at the city lights, a million twinkling possibilities, none of which seemed to extend to my own emotional landscape. My reflection in the darkened glass showed a woman who looked exactly like Victoria's perfect daughter, composed, successful, flawless. But the eyes held a flicker of something else, a deep-seated exhaustion that even the most expensive serum couldn't erase. A memory surfaced then unbidden from years ago. I was 17, a senior in high school, brimming with the excitement of college applications. I had just received my acceptance letter from a prestigious art and design school in California, a place known for its avant-garde approach to architecture. It was a dream I had secretly harbored, a vibrant, unconventional path. I remembered the thrill, the sense of liberation, as I imagined a life far from the shadowed halls of our Greenwich mansion. I had presented the acceptance letter to Victoria with a hesitant joy, expecting at the very least a congratulatory hug. Instead, her perfectly sculpted brows had furrowed slightly. She had picked up the letter, her slender fingers tracing the bold font, a subtle disdain in her posture. She had said that it was very impressive, of course, but that perhaps it wasn't the most practical choice. She had then suggested that a more traditional Ivy League program, perhaps an engineering or business degree, would be far more beneficial for my future and indeed for the family's legacy. She had looked at me with those knowing eyes, the ones that could convey so much without a single spoken word. She had reminded me of my responsibilities, of the family's fragile state after Lily's death, implying that pursuing a flighty artistic endeavor in a distant state would be an act of selfishness, a betrayal. I remembered the air, leaving my lungs the vibrant color draining from my dream. Within weeks, I had switched my applications to Columbia, focusing on financial architecture, a path that was undeniably practical, beneficial, and most importantly, close to home. I had buried my true desires beneath a mountain of textbooks and a relentless pursuit of academic excellence, desperate to earn the approval that felt forever out of reach. I told myself it was for the family, for Victoria. I convinced myself it was the right choice. But a part of me, a small, rebellious spark, had dimmed that day, extinguished by the cold, calculated logic of obligation. Now, as an adult, a successful architect, I saw the pattern with chilling clarity. Victoria hadn't just stifled my artistic aspirations. She had redirected them, molded them to fit her own grand design for my life, a design that served her narrative of the perfect, resilient family. And Owen, poor Owen, was being subjected to the same subtle, insidious manipulation. My thoughts were interrupted by another call from Victoria. This time her voice held an unusual tone, a blend of excitement and thinly veiled expectation. She announced that she had a new project for me, something truly special, something that would honor Lily's memory in the most profound way. She said that it had come to her in a dream, a vision, and she knew I, with my unparalleled talent, was the only one who could bring it to life. She urged me to come to the mansion that weekend, emphasizing that it was a matter of utmost importance, a family imperative. The word imperative hung in the air, a familiar noose. I agreed, knowing resistance was futile. The thought of another weekend immersed in her world, another layer of her control, weighed heavily on me. But the phrase, honor Lily's memory, twisted something deep inside me, a fresh stab of that old, persistent guilt. Maybe, just maybe, this was it. Maybe this project would finally be the true atonement, the genuine act of love that would heal us all. The smallest, most desperate part of me still clung to that hope, a fragile thread woven into the tapestry of my pain. The drive to Greenwich felt longer than usual. The perfectly manicured landscapes, the stately homes, all seemed to mock the disarray within me. When I arrived, Victoria greeted me with an almost unsettling enthusiasm. She said that she was so glad I had come and that she knew I would understand. She led me into her study, a room usually reserved for her most important pronouncements. Arthur was there, sitting in his armchair, a half-read book in his lap, his expression placid as ever. Owen was also present, looking uncomfortable, his gaze fixed on the antique rug. Victoria then unveiled her vision. She pulled out elaborate sketches, magazine clippings, and historical photographs. She announced that she wanted to commission the construction of a magnificent Lily's Legacy Memorial Garden on the grounds of the old St. Jude's Church, the very church where Lily's memorial service had been held. It would be a breathtaking testament to Lily's innocence and the family's enduring love, a place for quiet reflection and public remembrance. It would feature a grand fountain, ornate stone benches, meticulously landscaped flower beds, and a central soaring spire designed to touch the heavens. She described it with an almost manic fervor, her words painting a picture of unparalleled grandeur. She then turned to me, her eyes sparkling with an almost predatory glint. She said that she wanted me to design it. She wanted me to lead the entire project pro bono, of course. She said that it would be my contribution, my personal tribute to my sister, a chance to truly make amends for what had happened. She then added almost as an afterthought that it would also be a wonderful opportunity for the family to come together to heal as a unit. My breath hitched. Make amends. The words, unspoken for so long now, hung in the air, thick with their intended malice. She was weaponizing my grief, my guilt, my love for Lily, twisting it into a lever for her own ambition, her own need for public validation. The project was not about Lily. It was about Victoria's narrative, her public persona as the grieving mother who had risen from the ashes, guiding her family through unspeakable tragedy. I looked at Owen, who was now staring intently at his hands, avoiding my gaze. I looked at Arthur, who simply nodded vaguely in agreement with Victoria's pronouncements, his face a mask of practiced neutrality. No one questioned it. No one saw the insidious manipulation beneath the surface. Or perhaps no one dared to. A wave of conflicting emotions washed over me, the old familiar rush of guilt, the ingrained desire to please her, the yearning for her elusive approval. But stronger, now sharper, was a burgeoning resentment, a fierce protective instinct for the younger version of myself, the one whose dreams had been systematically dismantled. And for Owen. I managed to maintain my composure. I told her that it was a truly ambitious project, and that I would need time to consider the scope, the feasibility, and its impact on my existing commitments. Victoria merely waved away my concerns. She said that she knew I would make time because this was family. She reminded me that some things were more important than commercial projects. She then added that she had already scheduled a meeting with the church board for me the following week. It was a done deal, orchestrated and executed without my consent. That night alone in the guest room of the mansion, the opulent surroundings felt suffocating. I couldn't sleep. The words "make amends" echoed in the silence, a cruel, persistent taunt. I got up and wandered to Owen's studio, a detached building on the property that Victoria had funded and meticulously overseen. The door was unlocked. Inside the studio was a riot of color and creative chaos, a stark contrast to the sterile perfection of the main house. Canvases leaned against walls, some finished, some half done. There were paints, brushes, discarded sketches. A faint scent of turpentine hung in the air. This was Owen's world, his only true refuge. I remembered a conversation with Owen a few months prior during one of my routine check-ins. He had spoken excitedly about a new series he was developing, abstract pieces, infused with deep, swirling blues and grays representing his internal landscape, his struggles with anxiety. He said that he felt a real connection to this style, that it was finally his. But Victoria, he had admitted with a sigh, had dismissed it outright. She had called it depressing and unworthy of his true potential, pushing him back towards the more palatable landscapes and still lifes that adorned her own walls. He then told me that she had even hinted at cutting off his studio funding if he pursued this dark direction. I had consoled him, promising to talk to her to somehow mediate, but I never did. I had simply reinforced his dependence, inadvertently upholding Victoria's control. Now, as I scanned the room, I saw no sign of these dark, abstract pieces. Only the familiar, brightly colored landscapes and charming, still lifes, the kind Victoria approved of. My heart sank. Owen had capitulated. He was sacrificing his artistic soul to maintain the illusion, to keep his fragile peace. Then my gaze fell upon a stack of old, forgotten boxes tucked away in a dusty corner. Curiosity, a dangerous emotion I usually suppressed, compelled me to investigate. Inside, beneath layers of old photographs and childhood drawings, I found a small, tattered, leather-bound journal. Lily's journal. I remembered it instantly. Lily had loved to draw and write little stories. She had carried this journal everywhere. I had assumed it was lost in the accident, like so many other fragments of our past. My hands trembled as I carefully opened it. The pages were filled with her childish scrawl, vibrant crayon drawings, and simple, heartfelt observations. I began to read, transported back to a world untainted by grief and manipulation. Lily wrote about her love for Barnaby, her excitement for her upcoming birthday, her dreams of becoming a fairy princess, and most poignantly, her admiration for me. She wrote that she wanted to be an architect just like Cassidy, to build tall, beautiful towers. She had even drawn a whimsical little house labeled Cassidy and Lily's Dream Home, a tiny cottage surrounded by a garden of bright, impossible flowers. There was no mention of a grand memorial, no elaborate monuments. Just the simple, pure dreams of a little girl who adored her older sister. And not a single word of blame, not a hint of resentment for me. Her love for me, her faith in me radiated from every page. My vision blurred with unshed tears, hot and sharp, burning away the years of guilt and self-blame. The image Victoria had painted of a grieving, unforgiving spirit was a lie. Lily had loved me unequivocally. As I continued to turn the pages, something else caught my eye tucked between the worn leaves. A faded, crumpled envelope addressed to Victoria. It was from a distant Aunt Margaret who had lived in California. The postmark was from a few weeks after Lily's funeral. My father's sister, a free spirit who had always been a thorn in Victoria's side, a woman who often spoke her mind. I had barely seen her since the accident. Victoria had slowly, systematically distanced our family from anyone who dared to question her narrative. I hesitated, a strange dread chilling my veins. Reading someone else's mail, even old forgotten letters, felt like a violation. But a stronger impulse, a hunger for truth, compelled me. I carefully unfolded the brittle paper. The letter was brief, but its contents hit me like a physical blow. Aunt Margaret wrote that she was so sorry for Victoria's loss, and that she knew how much Lily meant to her. She then said that she had heard some disturbing rumors from mutual acquaintances about the accident, whispers that Victoria was spinning a tragic tale to garner sympathy and to subtly shift blame. She explicitly stated that she heard Victoria was implying that I, Cassidy, had been reckless or distracted behind the wheel, suggesting that my young age and enthusiasm had led to the tragedy. Aunt Margaret implored Victoria to be honest, to not let grief twist the truth, and to protect me, her surviving daughter, from unfair accusations. She then said that she knew the police report cleared me and that it was a pure accident, and that Victoria should remember that. My hands began to shake violently, the journal and letter rustling. The air in the studio suddenly felt thin, suffocating. It wasn't just unspoken blame, it was an active, deliberate campaign. Victoria hadn't just allowed a narrative of my guilt to persist. She had created it. She had actively manipulated the perception of the accident, using Lily's death not just to garner sympathy but to subtly, cruelly control me. Every sacrifice, every financial contribution, every bending of my own will, every suppressed dream, it all came crashing down around me. My entire life had been a meticulously choreographed dance of atonement, a desperate scramble to rebuild a family that never truly wanted to be rebuilt by me, only controlled by Victoria. The Lily's Legacy Memorial Garden wasn't a tribute. It was another brick in her manipulative fortress, another gilded cage to trap me. I looked at Lily's journal again, her innocent words of love, her simple dreams. Then I looked at Aunt Margaret's letter exposing Victoria's calculated cruelty. The contrast was a searing pain in my chest. Lily's memory had been hijacked, twisted into a weapon against me. A cold, clear resolve began to solidify within me, hardening the fragmented pieces of my heart. The tremor of unease from the gala had erupted into a full-blown earthquake. The foundation wasn't just cracked, it was crumbling, and I, the architect, was about to tear it all down. The pain was still immense, but it was now laced with a burning, righteous anger. The game, I realized with a chilling certainty, was about to change. My mother had built her empire on my guilt and Lily's ghost. It was time to watch it fall. The architect of ruin, the leather-bound journal, Lily's tiny, hopeful script, lay open beside Aunt Margaret's faded letter on my pristine glass coffee table. The words innocent and pure clashed violently with the cold, calculating lines of betrayal etched into Victoria's missive. For 15 years, I had believed I was a tragic heroine burdened with an unavoidable sin, striving to atone for a moment of youthful clumsiness. Now I saw myself as a pawn, a carefully placed piece in Victoria's elaborate game of appearances and control. My suffering reached its zenith in those hours alone in my silent apartment. It wasn't the sharp, agonizing pain of fresh grief, but a deeper, more insidious wound, the unraveling of my entire self-perception. Every sacrifice, every late night at the office to ensure the family's financial stability, every suppressed desire for my own life twisted into a grotesque mockery. My identity as the strong daughter, the pillar of the family, was a construct, a role I had been forced into, then forced to play, all to serve Victoria's narrative. The love I desperately craved, the forgiveness I tirelessly sought had been a mirage, a cruel trick of the light designed to keep me tethered. I remembered Victoria's voice ringing in my ears from our last conversation, pushing for the Lily's Legacy Memorial Garden, her insincere words of honor and amends. She hadn't been offering absolution, she had been tightening the chains. The thought of pouring my skill, my time, my very soul into a project that was nothing more than another monument to her deceit, another symbol of my bondage, was unbearable. The air felt thin, sharp, scraping against the raw edges of my exposed nerves. I wanted to scream, to shatter the elegant silence of my loft, to break something, anything to release the torrent of rage and despair building within me. But architects don't scream. They plan, they build, and sometimes they dismantle. A cold, hard resolve began to crystallize in the core of my being, sharper than any razor, more unyielding than steel. The victim, the guilt-ridden daughter, was dead. In her place, something new, something dangerous was being forged. I picked up my phone, my fingers steady despite the tremor deep inside. It was time to start building my own narrative. A narrative of justice. My first move was to hit where Victoria was most vulnerable, her carefully curated illusion of effortless wealth and seamless control. Victoria managed the family's social calendar, their public image, and their spending, but I was the invisible hand behind the curtain, ensuring the numbers always balanced. I had been funneling a significant portion of my income into a discreet family fund, covering everything from the mansion's colossal utility bills and property taxes to the unexpected emergencies that always seemed to crop up. Now that flow would become a trickle, then stop. The following Monday, I initiated a series of prudent financial restructurings within my personal portfolio. I called Victoria later that week, my voice calm, professional, almost apologetic. I told her that my firm was embarking on an incredibly ambitious expansion project, one that required immediate and substantial personal investment on my part. I explained that while it was a phenomenal opportunity for my career, it unfortunately meant I needed to temporarily divert a significant portion of my liquid assets. I assured her that it was only for a few months and that I deeply regretted any inconvenience it might cause. I used all the jargon she respected, all the talk of growth opportunity and strategic positioning, knowing she would understand the language of ambition even if she secretly resented it. Her initial reaction was a brittle laugh. She said that she understood, of course, and that she was so proud of my success. She then added almost casually that she hoped it wouldn't impact our little arrangements. I feigned a slight hesitation, a hint of concern. I told her that it might slightly for the next quarter or two. I suggested that perhaps for the time being the family might need to tighten their belts just a little, perhaps delay some of the non-essential expenses she had planned. Her voice tightened perceptibly. She said that she didn't think that would be necessary, that she was sure she could manage. There was a note of irritation quickly masked. She then quickly changed the subject back to the Lily's Legacy Memorial Garden, reiterating her expectation that I would present initial designs to the church board the following week. She dismissed my financial concerns as fleeting, a temporary hiccup in my otherwise flawless financial flow. She was too enamored with the idea of her public tribute to recognize the subtle shift in the tectonic plates beneath her feet. Watching her dismiss my carefully constructed excuse, oblivious to the coming storm, a flicker of something new ignited within me. It wasn't happiness, not yet. It was a cold, quiet sense of satisfaction, a small victory in a battle that had just begun. The sharp edge of my suffering began to dull, replaced by the sharpening focus of strategic intent. My next step involved Owen. He was another pawn in Victoria's game, but unlike me, he was still malleable, still capable of being rescued. I couldn't free myself without trying to free him too. I arranged to meet him at a small independent coffee shop in downtown Stamford, far from Victoria's prying eyes and ears. He looked haggard, his usually vibrant artist spirit dulled by what I now recognized as Victoria's relentless pressure. He said that the gala had been a nightmare and that his investors had been more interested in his mother's latest charity luncheon than his actual art. He confessed that he was on the verge of giving up, that he felt like a fraud painting what others expected rather than what his soul truly craved. He then admitted that he felt trapped, that he was beholden to Mom for everything, for the studio, for his supplies, for his very identity as an artist. I looked at him, remembering the conversation he had years ago about his darker art. I pulled Lily's journal from my bag along with Aunt Margaret's letter. I placed them on the table between us. I told him that I had found these and that I wanted him to read them. His eyes widened, first in confusion, then in dawning horror as he absorbed the truth. He read Lily's heartfelt words of love for me, her simple dreams so unlike the grandiosity Victoria demanded. Then he read Aunt Margaret's letter exposing Victoria's subtle yet insidious campaign of blame and manipulation. His face drained of color, his jaw clenched. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a raw, agonizing understanding. He said that he couldn't believe it that Mom would do something like that. He then confessed that he had always felt something was off, that her grief had felt like a cage around them both. He then admitted that she had often reminded him of how much Lily had adored her, how he needed to be strong for her now, how I had abandoned them. He then said that he felt sick to his stomach. I acknowledged that she had done the same to me, making me feel that I was responsible for his well-being, for the entire family's stability. I told him that for years I had poured my money, my energy, my very identity into keeping her carefully constructed world intact, believing it was my penance. But she had been manipulating us, both using Lily's ghost to fuel her own twisted need for control. Then I shifted. I told him that he was not alone, and that she could not control him anymore. I reminded him of his true talent, of his desire to create his own art, the darker pieces he had shown me. I told him that I knew he was capable of so much more than what she allowed him to be. I then offered him an olive branch, a path to independence. I told him that I would personally fund a small independent gallery show for his new authentic work. I emphasized that it would be entirely his away from Victoria's influence, a chance to reclaim his voice. I explained that it wouldn't be grand, not the kind of splash Victoria craved, but it would be real. He looked at me, a flicker of hope, tentative but undeniable, igniting in his eyes. He said that he didn't know if he could do it, that he was scared of Mom's reaction. I reminded him that she only had power if he gave it to her. I told him that this was his chance to break free, to honor Lily's true memory by living authentically, something she never got to do. It took him a week to agree, a week of internal struggle. But when he finally called, his voice was stronger than I had heard it in years. He said that he was in. Working with Owen on his independent show was a revelation. We found a small, edgy gallery space in a Brooklyn art district, a stark contrast to the traditional stuffy venues Victoria usually favored. He poured his heart into his new series, shadows and light abstract pieces that explored grief, anxiety, and the quiet resilience of the human spirit. There was a raw honesty to them, a powerful vulnerability that resonated deeply. The night of Owen's gallery opening, Victoria was conspicuously absent. She had called feigning a sudden migraine after learning the venue was so far from Greenwich and hardly appropriate for a Miller. Her disdain was palpable, a testament to her need for control and her inability to appreciate anything that didn't fit her narrow definition of success. But Owen didn't need her. The gallery was packed with a diverse crowd. Fellow artists, curious onlookers, genuine art lovers. His work resonated. People talked about its emotional depth, its originality. I watched him glowing, explaining his process, his vision, his own voice. When a renowned art critic, an acquaintance of mine, praised his unflinching honesty and powerful emotional landscape, Owen's eyes met mine across the crowded room, shining with a pure, unadulterated joy. In that moment, a profound sense of satisfaction washed over me, deeper and more potent than any professional triumph. My suffering, the acute pain of betrayal, began to recede, replaced by the warmth of seeing Owen truly free, truly seen for the first time in his adult life. This wasn't just revenge, it was redemption. I was breaking chains not just for myself, but for him. Victoria, however, was not one to be easily circumvented. The financial disruptions, though subtle, were beginning to cause her irritation. Her unforeseen expenses were increasing. She complained to me not outright but with pointed remarks about the rising cost of living, the lack of financial foresight in others, and the need for all family members to contribute. She continued to press for the Lily's Legacy project, her tone becoming increasingly demanding. She had informed me that the church board was eagerly awaiting my final proposal and that she expected nothing less than spectacular. Lily would be so disappointed if this wasn't absolutely perfect, she said during one particularly fraught phone call, her voice laced with that familiar, guilt-inducing inflection. This is how we heal, Cassidy. This is how we show the world our strength, our unwavering love. Her words, once so potent, now held no power over me. They were merely the hollow echoes of a crumbling facade. My pain had transformed into a cold, unwavering resolve. I was ready to give her spectacular. I was ready to give her a project that would indeed show the world something, but it wouldn't be her strength or her unwavering love. It would be her undoing. I dove into the design of the Lily's Legacy Memorial Garden with a chilling precision. I envisioned a memorial so grand, so breathtakingly opulent that it would beggar belief. A central fountain, yes, but not just any fountain. A bespoke multi-tiered marble masterpiece imported from Italy requiring specialized hydraulics and an intricate water purification system. The stone benches would be hand-carved, each a unique work of art. The flower beds would not just be landscaped, they would be a botanical wonderland requiring rare exotic plants and a dedicated team of full-time horticulturists. And the spire, it would be a 70-foot-tall structure of polished, custom-forged bronze requiring complex structural engineering and specialized permits for its sheer height. I meticulously sourced the most exclusive, the most expensive, the most logistically challenging materials and contractors. I inflated every cost, every timeline, every minute detail, ensuring that the project would be not just ambitious but financially ruinous. I presented the initial concepts to Victoria with a flourish, my voice brimming with the feigned enthusiasm of a true believer. I told her that this was it, the true embodiment of Lily's pure spirit, a testament to a love beyond measure. I said that anything less would be an insult to her memory. Victoria was ecstatic. Her eyes gleamed with a ravenous hunger for public acclaim. She clapped her hands together, declaring it to be absolutely brilliant, far beyond her wildest dreams. She said that this was the most beautiful tribute imaginable, and that it would cement the Miller legacy for generations. She praised my vision, my dedication, my unwavering commitment to family. She saw only the grandeur, the public spectacle, completely blind to the financial black hole I had so carefully engineered. The following weeks were a whirlwind of meetings with the church board, with contractors, with suppliers. I was the architect of ruin, meticulously laying the groundwork for Victoria's ultimate fall. Each astronomical estimate I presented, each extravagant material I specified, each impossibly tight deadline I set, was met with Victoria's unwavering approval. Her ego, her desperate need for public adoration blinded her to the rapidly escalating costs, the sheer impossibility of it all. My internal suffering, the raw pain of being manipulated, was now a distant echo replaced by a cold, exhilarating sense of control. I carefully documented everything, every approval, every signature, every email confirming her unwavering commitment to the escalating budget. I wanted irrefutable proof, a paper trail as meticulous as my architectural blueprints. This wasn't about vengeance born of fleeting anger, it was about dismantling a lifetime of deceit piece by calculated piece. The climax of this chapter arrived with the signing of the initial contracts for the Lily's Legacy Memorial Garden. The figures were staggering, far exceeding any reasonable budget, let alone the Miller family's actual liquid assets. But Victoria, radiant and triumphant, signed them all without a second glance, already basking in the imagined glory of the dedication ceremony. She looked at me, her smile wide and self-satisfied. She thanked me, my darling, for making her dream a reality. She then added that this was truly making amends for all of us. I met her gaze, a silent, predatory gleam in my eyes. Her dream, yes, but a reality far more brutal than she could ever imagine. The satisfaction that coursed through me was intoxicating, a powerful elixir against years of internalized pain. It was a dark, dangerous kind of freedom. The architect of towering structures was now the architect of ruin, and the foundation for Victoria's downfall was finally irrevocably set. The deliberate erosion. The first few weeks after Victoria had triumphantly signed the contracts for the Lily's Legacy Memorial Garden were a strange blend of exhilaration and bone-deep weariness. The initial surge of righteous anger that had fueled my detailed, ruinous design had settled into a cold, methodical determination. My pain, the raw agony of realizing my entire life had been a carefully constructed lie, still lingered, a phantom limb-ache in my soul. But each time I meticulously signed off on another outrageously inflated invoice, each time I saw Victoria's blind excitement over a new, impossibly expensive material, a subtle shift occurred within me. The pain dimmed, replaced by a quiet, almost dangerous satisfaction. I was no longer the victim. I was the architect of her comeuppance. My first act of deliberate erosion had been the most critical, the subtle yet significant reduction of my financial contributions. It wasn't a sudden dramatic cut, which would have instantly flagged Victoria's attention and prompted an immediate explosive confrontation. Instead, I made it gradual, almost imperceptible to the casual observer, but devastating in its cumulative effect. My calls to Victoria during this period were laced with carefully crafted excuses, an unforeseen hold on a major project payment, a strategic reallocation of my personal funds into high-growth, low-liquidity investments, a temporary adjustment required by my firm's new aggressive expansion strategy. I spoke her language, the language of high finance and ambitious growth, knowing she wouldn't question the legitimacy of my professional decisions, only resent their inconvenient timing. Her initial responses were dismissive. She would offer a brittle laugh saying that she understood, of course, and that she was so proud of my success. She would then, almost as an afterthought, inquire about the timing of my next contribution or casually mention an upcoming social event that required certain expenditures. When I would gently reiterate the need for fiscal prudence on the family's part due to my temporary liquidity issues, her voice would tighten, a flicker of irritation betraying her polished composure. She would say that she didn't think that would be necessary, that she was sure she could manage. Her tone implied that my professional success, while commendable, was ultimately a minor inconvenience compared to the grander scheme of the Miller family's prestige. She was so convinced of her own ability to conjure money or simply demand it that the true implications of my financial withdrawal completely escaped her. But the unforeseen expenses inevitably began to mount. The mansion, a grand old dame, constantly demanded attention. A pipe burst in the west wing. The antique boiler needed replacing. The annual landscaping bill, already astronomical, inexplicably seemed to climb even higher. My phone calls from Victoria shifted from casual inquiries to increasingly frantic requests for temporary assistance or short-term loans to cover these unexpected emergencies. One afternoon, her voice tight with thinly veiled desperation, she called to lament about a sudden, inexplicable surge in their property taxes. She explained that their accountant, a meticulous but somewhat timid man who had served the family for decades, had informed her that without a substantial immediate influx of funds they would be facing a penalty. She then, with practiced delicacy, suggested that perhaps my strategic reallocations could be, shall we say, strategically unallocated for just a short period. I listened patiently, my own pulse steady. I expressed my deepest sympathy for her predicament, acknowledging that unexpected expenses could be so frustrating. I then, with unwavering calm, reiterated my previous position. I explained that unfortunately my funds were indeed tied up in the most aggressive phase of my firm's expansion. I explained that to pull them out now would not only incur significant penalties for me but would also jeopardize a major promotion I had been working towards for years. I said that I was so sorry, but I simply couldn't access that kind of liquidity at the moment without causing severe damage to my own career. I then, with a touch of feigned helpfulness, suggested that perhaps given the enormous costs now associated with the Lily's Legacy Memorial Garden, they might need to explore other options. Perhaps I mused the initial phase of the garden could be slightly scaled back, or maybe I offered she could ask some of her influential friends, the ones she always bragged about, for a temporary bridging loan. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening thick with Victoria's barely contained fury. She eventually snapped, saying that it was completely out of the question, that the garden was absolutely essential, and that she would never beg her friends for money. She declared that she would find a way, as she always did, and abruptly ended the call. A small, triumphant shiver ran down my spine. This was the first time I had directly, unequivocally refused her explicit financial demand. The satisfaction was palpable, a potent balm to the lingering ache of past hurts. It was no longer just a reduction, it was a deliberate denial. And the architect of her financial stability was now carefully, methodically dismantling her illusion of control. Meanwhile, Owen's independent art show in Brooklyn was gaining unexpected traction. The Shadows and Light series, born from his personal struggles and freed from Victoria's aesthetic dictates, was resonating deeply with critics and buyers alike. Word of mouth spread, and a more prominent gallery in Soho expressed interest in hosting a follow-up exhibition. Owen, emboldened by his initial success and the validation of his authentic work, was a transformed man. His shoulders, once perpetually slumped, were straighter. His eyes, once shadowed with anxiety, now held a spark of self-assurance. Victoria predictably attempted to co-opt his success. She called Owen, brimming with enthusiasm, saying that she had heard about his little show and that she was so proud of him. She suggested that he should bring his new pieces to the upcoming Miller charity auction, a high-profile event she was hosting where they could be showcased to a truly discerning audience. She subtly hinted that this was his chance for real exposure, implicitly dismissing his Brooklyn success as provincial. Owen, however, politely but firmly declined. He explained that his new work was for a specific audience and that he wanted to maintain the artistic integrity of his new direction. He then, with a newfound confidence that genuinely surprised me, said that he appreciated her offer but that he was focusing on his own independent path now. He even subtly referenced how important it was for him to maintain his artistic autonomy, a direct echo of my own earlier words to him. Victoria, caught off guard, stammered for a moment, then recovered with a strained laugh. She said that she understood, of course, and that she admired his artistic dedication, but the edge in her voice, the quick, clipped way she ended the conversation, told me everything I needed to know. Her control over Owen's artistic narrative, a narrative she had meticulously crafted and exploited, was slipping. Another carefully placed block in her edifice had been dislodged. The satisfaction in me deepened a warm, steady glow, replacing the icy grip of past resentment. Seeing Owen thrive truly free was a far more potent reward than any fleeting act of vengeance. My next phase of psychological dismantling involved planting seeds of doubt within Victoria's inner circle. I couldn't outright expose her yet. The time wasn't right. But I could begin to erode the unwavering faith others had in her to make them see the cracks I knew existed. My target, Aunt Debbie, my father's older sister, a woman known for her keen intellect and a quiet, discerning nature that Victoria often mistook for complacency. Aunt Debbie had always been kind to me, a rare oasis of genuine warmth in the emotional desert of our family. She was less susceptible to Victoria's charm, more likely to see through the polished facade. I called Aunt Debbie ostensibly to discuss the escalating details of the Lily's Legacy Memorial Garden, knowing Victoria would proudly share my involvement with everyone. I expressed my concerns about the project's sheer ambition and the unprecedented financial commitment it required. I spoke of the immense pressure it was placing on Arthur, who seemed to be looking more tired than usual. I then, with a carefully calibrated sigh, mentioned how profoundly beautiful Lily's own dreams had been, so simple and pure. I described her childlike wish for a dream home for us, a small, vibrant garden of our own, a space for shared joy. I painted a picture of Lily's true spirit, so starkly different from the grandiosity of the towering bronze spire and imported marble fountain Victoria envisioned. Aunt Debbie listened thoughtfully, her responses measured. She agreed that Arthur did seem a bit stressed, and that the memorial did sound incredibly elaborate. She then asked, her voice tinged with a delicate curiosity, if I truly believed this grand scale was what Lily would have wanted. I paused, allowing the question to hang in the air, weighted with unspoken implications. I then said that I believed Lily would have wanted something that reflected true love and peace, not just grandeur. I said that I had always believed that true memorials were built in the heart, not just in stone. I subtly implied that perhaps in our grief we sometimes lost sight of the simplest truths. I didn't show her Lily's journal or Aunt Margaret's letter yet. It was too soon for such a direct assault. But the seed was planted. I saw it in her eyes, a flicker of understanding, a dawning reevaluation of Victoria's motives. The satisfaction I felt was not vengeful but strategic, the quiet triumph of a careful chess player. The construction of the Lily's Legacy Memorial Garden began with much fanfare, orchestrated, of course, by Victoria. There was a small, groundbreaking ceremony complete with local dignitaries and a press release touting the Miller family's philanthropic spirit and unwavering devotion. Victoria, resplendent in white, spoke eloquently of healing and remembrance, completely oblivious to the financial quicksand she was stepping into. I, as the lead architect, maintained an outward appearance of unwavering dedication. But inwardly, I was meticulously executing my plan. I deliberately chose highly skilled but notoriously slow and exacting contractors, who, while delivering impeccable quality, also ensured every phase of the project ran significantly over budget and behind schedule. I approved every necessary change order, every unforeseen material upgrade, always with Victoria's enthusiastic endorsement, which I meticulously documented. The rare exotic plants for the botanical garden, the bespoke bronze casting for the spire, the intricate marble work for the fountain, each decision was a calculated blow to Victoria's dwindling resources. Victoria, blinded by her desire for public acclaim and the sheer scale of the project, pushed for even more extravagant additions. A specially commissioned stained glass window, hand-forged iron gates, a commemorative plaque with an inscription she herself meticulously crafted. I reluctantly agreed to each new request, feigning concern about the budget while subtly encouraging her, always ensuring her direct instructions were recorded in emails and meeting minutes. The cost spiraled, bleeding their accounts dry, but Victoria's pride, her need for this grand spectacle, prevented her from pulling back. She had publicly announced the scale of the project. To scale it back now would be an admission of financial weakness, a stain on her perfect facade. The first major crack in Victoria's formidable armor appeared unexpectedly from an external source. One afternoon, my father Arthur called me, his voice unusually hesitant, almost frail. He said that their longtime financial advisor, Mr. Albright, had just had a rather alarming meeting with Victoria and him. He explained that Mr. Albright had presented a stark picture of their finances. The family's liquid assets were dangerously depleted, and the ongoing costs of the memorial project were simply unsustainable without liquidating a significant portion of their more stable, long-term investments which would incur massive penalties. Arthur admitted that Mr. Albright had tried to explain this to Victoria, but she had become very agitated, accusing him of undermining her vision and exaggerating their financial predicament. He confessed that he was worried that he didn't know what to do. This was it. The first, direct, external challenge to Victoria's financial control. She couldn't dismiss Mr. Albright as easily as she dismissed me. She couldn't charm away a bank statement. I offered Arthur my sympathy and professional advice. I suggested that perhaps it was time for a family meeting to review the financial situation with Mr. Albright. I told him that I was more than willing to lend my expertise as a good daughter should. My voice was calm, empathetic, a perfect performance of the supportive family member. Victoria, cornered and increasingly desperate, reluctantly agreed to the meeting. She called me, her voice clipped and irritable, instructing me to fix this, to use my financial genius to find a solution that wouldn't involve sacrificing everything. She was still operating under the illusion that I was her loyal soldier ready to deploy my skills for her benefit. The meeting with Mr. Albright was tense. Victoria, outwardly composed but with a brittle edge to her smile, attempted to charm and strong-arm the mild-mannered financial advisor. She dismissed his concerns as overly cautious and pessimistic. But Mr. Albright, armed with irrefutable figures, held firm. He laid out the grim reality: the memorial project was a financial black hole that was rapidly consuming their remaining wealth. When Victoria demanded a solution, I stepped in. I presented a carefully prepared rescue plan, outlining drastic, publicly embarrassing measures, the immediate sale of several valuable family heirlooms she cherished for their status symbol, the immediate downsizing of the mansion to a much smaller, more affordable property, or a complete halt to the memorial project. I framed it as the only prudent path forward given the unprecedented costs of the memorial and the current economic climate. My suggestions were designed to be utterly unacceptable to her, each one a direct assault on her pride and public image. Victoria's face flushed with a mixture of anger and humiliation. Her meticulously maintained facade finally began to crack, showing glimpses of the desperation beneath. She rejected every suggestion, her voice rising in pitch. She said that she would not part with her mother's pearls, and that she would certainly not sell the family home, and that the memorial project was going forward no matter what. I met her furious gaze directly, my own eyes, cool, unwavering. I simply stated with quiet authority that those were the only financially viable options available given the current situation. I concluded that if she was unwilling to consider them, then perhaps she needed to reconsider the entire memorial project itself. The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with the unspoken truth. Arthur looked at me, then at Victoria, a silent plea in his eyes. Victoria was cornered, trapped by her own vanity and my calculated precision. The initial crack in her armor had widened into a visible fissure, and I, the quiet architect, watched with a quiet, almost meditative satisfaction as the golden edifice she had so carefully constructed began its slow, deliberate erosion. I knew the real storm was yet to come, a public unraveling that would expose her for who she truly was. And I, finally free from the weight of guilt, was ready to weather it. The shattering mirror. The meeting with Mr. Albright had been a prelude, a quiet, contained explosion behind closed doors. Now the tremors began to spread. Victoria, desperate to maintain the illusion of control and wealth, made a decision that in hindsight was her most spectacular miscalculation. 2 weeks after the disastrous financial review, she called me, her voice clipped, barely concealing the frayed edges of her composure. She informed me that she had reevaluated the Lily's Legacy Memorial Garden project, and had decided, in consultation with the church board, to proceed with a slightly revised, more practical initial phase. She emphasized the word initial, trying to project a sense of strategic foresight rather than forced capitulation. She then instructed me to revise my blueprints, drastically scaling back the ambitious designs I had so carefully, ruinously crafted. I feigned reluctant agreement, assuring her of my professional adaptability. I knew this revised plan, a mere shadow of her original grand vision, would still be a financial strain, yet utterly fail to deliver the public spectacle she craved. It was a half measure, a public admission of weakness disguised as sensible planning. The cracks in her facade were widening, visible now even to the most casual observer. My pain, once a suffocating weight, had begun to recede, replaced by a cold, calculating resolve. Each step she took, each desperate attempt to save face, was merely tightening the noose I had so cleverly designed. The whispers began subtly, like rustling leaves in a manicured garden. First, among the contractors. My carefully selected, notoriously expensive firms now suddenly facing drastic budget cuts and delayed payments were not known for their discretion. I had ensured that their contracts, though signed by Victoria, held clauses that allowed for public disclosure in cases of financial default, a detail she had blindly overlooked in her haste for grandeur. Soon, rumors of the Miller family's unexpected financial challenges started circulating through the tight-knit Greenwich social circles. I watched and waited. My phone calls to Aunt Debbie, now more frequent, became a source of detached observation. She told me that she had heard the memorial project was being scaled back and that Victoria was quite agitated about it. She said that Victoria was blaming the unforeseen market fluctuations and the unrealistic expectations of the contractors. Aunt Debbie's voice held a new note of skepticism, a subtle shift from her usual polite deference. I knew the seeds of doubt I had planted were beginning to sprout. Owen, now fully immersed in the preparations for his Soho exhibition, was a different man. His studio, once under Victoria's watchful eye, was now his own domain. He called me regularly, not for advice on how to handle Victoria, but to discuss artistic concepts, gallery lighting, the thrill of finally creating without constraint. He told me that he had heard the gossip about the memorial and about Mom's finances. He then asked if it was true that she was really in trouble. I confirmed that she was, and that it was largely due to the memorial project. I then explained that her need for public acclaim had blinded her to the very real financial consequences. Owen was quiet for a long moment. He then said that he felt a weird mix of relief and sadness. He then confessed that he had never wanted all that grand stuff anyway, that it never felt like it was really for Lily. His pain, now being processed through his art, was transforming into understanding. It was a profound satisfaction seeing him emerge from the shadow. Victoria, meanwhile, was growing increasingly erratic. She clung to her social events with a manic intensity, hosting extravagant luncheon after luncheon, desperate to project an image of unwavering prosperity. But the cracks were showing. The guest lists, once brimming with the creme de la creme of New England society, began to dwindle. Invitations were declined with increasingly flimsy excuses. Her closest friends, women who had once orbited her like satellites, now kept a noticeable distance. Their smiles strained, their whispers quick and furtive. The nadir of her social unraveling came during a charity auction she insisted on hosting for a minor arts foundation, a desperate attempt to show she was still a force to be reckoned with. I attended, a quiet observer, my blue silk dress a subtle armor. The atmosphere was brittle, heavy with unspoken tension. Victoria, flushed and overly animated, clinked her glass, preparing for her grand speech, her carefully rehearsed performance of benevolence. Just as she raised her hand for silence, a hushed murmur swept through the room, then a collective gasp. A prominent local journalist known for his investigative pieces on the social elite had just received an alert on his phone. Within seconds, a wave of digital whispers followed by hushed gasps and open stares swept through the room. My phone in my clutch bag buzzed with an incoming news alert. I knew what it was. I had carefully, subtly provided certain key financial documents, anonymously of course, to a well-respected financial journalist known for his integrity and his disdain for hypocrisy. The information I had given him, combined with the whispers from the contractors and Mr. Albright's indiscreet yet accurate warnings, had been enough. The headline now flashing on phones across the room was brutal, stark, and utterly devastating: Miller family faces financial ruin, Lily's legacy memorial project exposed as a vanity project bankrupting prominent Greenwich matriarch. The article detailed the astronomical costs, the unsustainable nature of the memorial, and the glaring discrepancies between the Miller family's public image and their dwindling assets. It explicitly mentioned the scaled-back memorial as a direct result of financial distress, not strategic revision. It referenced anonymous sources, including a financial insider and multiple contractors who corroborated the narrative of Victoria's reckless spending and denial. The silence in the ballroom became absolute, a profound, crushing, steep stillness. Every single pair of eyes in the room, once politely averted or discreetly observing, now fixed on Victoria. Her hand, still raised for silence, slowly dropped. Her face, usually so perfectly composed, crumpled. The high color drained from her cheeks, leaving her skin a ghastly white. Her eyes, wide with shock, scanned the room, searching for an ally, a friendly face, a denial. But there was only a sea of stunned, uncomfortable faces, averted gazes, and the cold, unblinking glare of the digital screens. She swayed slightly, her sapphire gown suddenly looking less regal and more like a flimsy disguise. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. The image she had painstakingly crafted over decades, the resilient matriarch, the pillar of society, shattered into a million pieces before my very eyes. This wasn't just public humiliation, it was the annihilation of her entire identity. She stood there frozen, a statue of shock and despair amidst the ruins of her self-created empire. My father Arthur, who had been standing beside her, a perpetually silent fixture, seemed to deflate. His shoulders, always slightly hunched now, seemed to bear an unbearable weight. His gaze, usually so neutral, was filled with a dazed, uncomprehending anguish. He looked like a man who had suddenly woken from a decades-long sleep to find his world in ashes. He tried to put a hand on Victoria's arm, but she flinched away, her eyes still locked on the sea of accusatory stares. He retreated, shrinking into himself, his face gray and ashen. His silent collapse was in its own way as devastating as Victoria's public meltdown. Owen, who had arrived later and was standing near the entrance with a few friends from his gallery, witnessed the entire horrific tableau. His initial shock quickly gave way to a complex mixture of emotions. I saw pity in his eyes, yes, for the broken woman who was his mother. But beneath that, there was also a glimmer of something else: relief. Relief that the suffocating charade was finally over. Relief that the truth, however brutal, had finally set them free. He caught my eye across the room, and for the first time there was no fear, no dependence, only a shared understanding, a silent acknowledgement of the battle won. My own emotions were a tumultuous storm, yet strangely, incredibly calm. The deep, agonizing pain of betrayal, the years of quiet suffering, had finally undeniably receded. In its place, a fierce, almost primal sense of vindication surged through me. This wasn't joy, not in the traditional sense. It was the deep, resonant satisfaction of justice served, of truth finally unearthed. It was the feeling of a heavy, invisible burden being lifted from my shoulders, a lightness I hadn't felt in 15 years. The mirrors she had used to reflect her own glorious false image had shattered, revealing the hollow, ugly truth beneath. And I, the quiet architect, had orchestrated every single crack. I watched Victoria as she was slowly, almost gently led away by a visibly embarrassed member of her social committee, her once proud head bowed in shame. The grand ballroom, once a stage for her triumphs, was now a tomb for her public life. The hushed whispers resumed, but they were no longer about her power. They were about her downfall. I didn't linger. My mission in that room was complete. I slipped out a side door, leaving behind the wreckage of Victoria's world. The cool night air of Greenwich, usually so heavy with the scent of money and expectation, now felt crisp, clean, invigorating. My phone buzzed with calls and texts, a flurry of reactions to the news, from shocked relatives to concerned friends. I ignored them all. My focus was elsewhere. The suffering had ended. The satisfaction had begun. But this wasn't the end of the story. This was just the demolition phase. The true rebuilding, the construction of my own life, on my own terms, was yet to begin. I felt a faint smile touch my lips, a genuine smile that reached my eyes and for the first time touched my soul. The mirror was shattered. Now I could finally see myself. The unburdening, the cool night air of Greenwich, a stark contrast to the suffocating heat of the ballroom, felt like a cleansing balm on my skin. I drove back to New York in a trance, the city lights a blur through the windshield. My phone vibrated relentlessly in the passenger seat. A digital chorus of shocked relatives, gossiping acquaintances, and the occasional worried text from Owen. I ignored them all. My mind was quiet, unusually so after the storm. The deep, agonizing pain that had been a constant companion for 15 years had finally receded, leaving behind a vast, echoing emptiness. It wasn't happiness, not yet. It was something more profound, a profound, liberating stillness. The mirror shattered. The truth finally laid bare. The following days were a blur of work, of frantic energy channeling into my projects. My loft, once a symbol of my controlled solitude, now felt like a cocoon, a safe space to process the seismic shift that had occurred. The news article about the Miller family's financial distress and Victoria's vanity project had gone viral within their elite circles, quickly spreading beyond. The phone calls, the emails, the frantic messages from Victoria began almost immediately, a desperate cacophony of denial and manipulation. Her initial calls were scathing, accusatory. She said that I had humiliated her, that I had destroyed the family name, that I was a cruel, ungrateful daughter who had always sought to undermine her. Her voice, once so perfectly modulated, was now shrill, laced with raw fury. She declared that I had clearly planned this, that my sudden financial issues were a deliberate act of sabotage. I let her rant, my hand holding the receiver steadily, my own heart surprisingly calm. I simply stated, when she finally paused for breath, that the truth had a way of coming out eventually. I then told her that if she was ready to have an honest conversation about the past, then she could call me again. Otherwise, I had nothing more to say. I hung up, a strange sense of power settling over me. The old Cassidy would have crumbled, would have begged for forgiveness, would have tried to mitigate the damage. This new Cassidy simply set a boundary. Her tactics shifted. The anger gave way to a calculated desperation cloaked in self-pity. She sent a barrage of texts reminding me of all her sacrifices, as a mother recalling moments of manufactured warmth, pleading with me to save the family from this misunderstanding. She would then revert to demanding my financial help, claiming dire emergencies that I knew from my carefully monitored sources were often exaggerated or entirely fabricated. My response remained consistent, unwavering. I sent her a single concise email clearly outlining my terms. I am open to rebuilding a relationship when you are ready to acknowledge the past honestly and commit to mutual respect moving forward. Until then, I require distance. There was no emotion in the message, no room for interpretation. It was an architectural blueprint for a new, healthier dynamic, one she was clearly incapable of understanding or accepting. Her attempts to cross that boundary were met with silence. The guilt, once a suffocating cloak, had finally been shed. The true weight of her betrayal, however, was still settling. It wasn't just the financial manipulation or the public humiliation. It was the insidious way she had twisted Lily's memory, weaponizing my deepest grief against me. That was the wound that felt deepest, most unforgivable. A week after the auction, Arthur called. His voice was not the booming, confident tone of a retired professor, nor the passive neutrality I had grown accustomed to. It was frail, hesitant, etched with a profound weariness. He asked if I could meet him not at the mansion but at a quiet diner in a nearby town, a place far from Victoria's influence. I agreed. My heart pounded with a mix of dread and a faint, desperate hope. When I saw him, he looked utterly defeated. His usually meticulous attire was rumpled, his hair disheveled. He seemed to have aged a decade in a week. He slid into the booth opposite me, not meeting my eyes. He ordered black coffee, his hand shaking slightly as he brought the cup to his lips. He finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. He said that he was so sorry, Cassidy. He confessed that he didn't know how to begin, how to apologize for a lifetime of silence, a lifetime of complicity. He then admitted that he had known for years about Victoria's manipulations. Not all the details, perhaps, but enough to know that she was using my guilt, my love for Lily, to keep me financially tethered to the family. He confessed that he had witnessed her subtly twisting the narrative of the accident, making me out to be reckless, irresponsible. He had seen her slowly alienate us from anyone who might have offered an alternative perspective, like Aunt Margaret. He then admitted that he had been too weak, too afraid of Victoria's temper, too comfortable in his own quiet retreat to ever challenge her. He had simply let it happen. He had let her do it to me. He had failed me as a father. His words, raw and unvarnished, were a fresh wound, but also a balm. The acknowledgement, the confession, was something I had unconsciously yearned for, a missing piece of the puzzle that had tormented me for so long. The bitterness of betrayal, the years of silent resentment flowed through me, but also a strange, quiet understanding. He wasn't the master manipulator. He was the willing accomplice trapped in his own cage of fear and complacency. I told him that I appreciated his honesty, but that his silence had cost me dearly. I explained that it had cost me years of my life, years of trying to earn love that should have been freely given, years of believing I was somehow broken, guilty. He nodded, his eyes filled with tears. He said that he knew and that he regretted it more than anything. He then told me that he had tried once or twice in the early years after Lily's death to suggest family counseling, to talk about Lily openly, but Victoria had shut him down vehemently. She had insisted that they needed to be strong to move forward, to not dwell on the past. He then admitted that he had seen how she had turned Lily's memory into a weapon, using her death to control us both, especially me. He then revealed more details that further cemented Victoria's ruthless opportunism. He confessed that Victoria had strategically drained his retirement fund years ago, pushing for ill-fated investments that had benefited her social standing more than their actual wealth. He then explained that my generous contributions had for years been covering not just unexpected expenses but the gaping hole left by her financial misadventures. He told me that she had even hinted subtly that without my continued support they might be forced to sell the mansion, a prospect that always sent her into a fit of rage. He had allowed me to believe I was solely responsible for keeping the roof over their heads when, in fact, I was propping up Victoria's unsustainable lifestyle and covering her reckless financial decisions. The full extent of betrayal settled in heavy and cold. It wasn't just about guilt, it was about outright exploitation. I had been her personal ATM, her unwitting enabler, allowing her to maintain a facade of wealth and stability while she systematically drained my resources and my spirit. Yet in hearing Arthur's confession and seeing his genuine broken remorse, a different emotion began to stir pity. Not for Victoria, but for him. He was a victim too, in his own way, of her domineering personality, a man who had chosen a lifetime of quiet submission over the painful confrontation of truth. I looked at him, truly looked at him for the first time in years. I told him that I couldn't undo the past and that I couldn't forgive him overnight. But I acknowledged that his honesty was a start, a small, fragile bridge built across the chasm of silence. I then told him that I needed time and that he did too to figure out who we were without Victoria's shadow looming over us. He nodded, a glimmer of hope in his tired eyes. He said that he understood and that he would wait for as long as it took. Meanwhile, Owen's Soho exhibition Echoes of Truth opened to rave reviews. His powerful, abstract pieces, born from his liberated spirit, resonated with a wide audience. He had finally found his voice, his authentic self. I attended the opening not as his financial patron but as his proud sister. He was vibrant, confident, truly happy. He drew me aside, his arm around my shoulders. He said that he owed me everything and that I had saved him. I told him that he had saved himself and that I just helped him see the path. We talked for hours that night, not about Victoria, but about our shared childhood, our separate griefs, our hopes for the future. We spoke of Lily not as a source of guilt or manipulation, but as the loving, joyful sister she truly was. We remembered her laughter, her silly songs, her impossible dreams. It was a conversation filled with quiet tears and healing laughter, a true reconciliation built on honesty and mutual respect. The bond we forged that night was stronger than any facade Victoria had ever tried to build. We were not just siblings. We were allies, survivors. A few days later, Aunt Debbie called. Her voice was firm, resolute. She had read the article, of course, and had connected the dots, remembering my concerns about the memorial project. She said that she was so sorry, Cassidy, that she had suspected something was amiss for years but had been too afraid to speak up. She then confessed that Victoria had actively discouraged her from seeing me after the accident, creating a subtle but effective barrier. She confirmed that Margaret had indeed sent that letter and that Victoria had deliberately kept it from me, twisting the narrative to suit her own ends. She then apologized for not being a better advocate for me when I was younger. Her words, another layer of truth unveiled, stung but also brought a strange sense of validation. I was not imagining things. I was not broken. The betrayal was real, systemic, meticulously orchestrated. Aunt Debbie offered me a genuine, unconditional offer of support, a safe harbor in the storm. She was a connection to a healthier past, a promise of a more authentic future. As for the Lily's Legacy Memorial Garden, it became a symbol of Victoria's shattered empire. With her reputation in tatters and her finances irrevocably depleted, the grand vision was abandoned. The church board, embarrassed by the public scandal, quietly put the project on indefinite hold. Eventually, Owen, in a quiet act of true remembrance, collaborated with a local community garden initiative to transform a small corner of the church grounds into a simple, beautiful Lily's garden filled with wildflowers and a single plies, an understated stone bench, inscribed with a line from Lily's journal, "To build beautiful things with love." It was small, humble, but profoundly real. It was everything Victoria's grand monument was not. My own life shifted dramatically. The world of high-rise corporate architecture, once my refuge and my penance, now felt sterile, unfulfilling. I took a sabbatical from my firm, something I never would have dared to do before. I volunteered with Habitat for Humanity, designing affordable, sustainable homes for families in need. I found a profound joy in building not just structures but communities, in creating spaces that nurtured rather than controlled. It was a stark contrast to Victoria's vanity projects, a true act of creation untainted by manipulation or guilt. I started therapy, truly delving into the deep-seated trauma of Lily's death and Victoria's subsequent betrayal. It was a painful, often messy process, unearthing years of suppressed grief and anger. But with each session, each tear shed, each memory re-examined, I felt lighter, more whole. I learned that my worth was not tied to my accomplishments or my ability to fix others or my mother's elusive approval. My worth came from within, inherent and unconditional. The revenge I had orchestrated was not about destroying Victoria for its own sake. It was about liberating myself and Owen from her suffocating control. It was about forcing the truth into the light, however painful. And in doing so, I had inadvertently salvaged fragments of my family, creating a new, healthier foundation with Arthur and Owen, one built on honesty, respect, and genuine connection. Victoria faded into the isolated existence she had in many ways created for herself. She lived in a smaller, less opulent home, a visible symbol of her diminished status. Her social life, once her lifeblood, withered. She never truly acknowledged her role in the family's dysfunction, clinging to her narrative of victimhood. But her power over me, over Owen, was gone. Life would continue to present challenges. The scars of the past would always be with me, but I was no longer defined by them. I was no longer the guilt-ridden daughter desperately seeking absolution. I was Cassidy Miller, an architect, a sister, a daughter, finding her own way, building her own life, one brick of authenticity, one beam of self-worth at a time. The gilded cage was broken, the mirror shattered, and in the fragments I finally saw the reflection of a woman who was truly, beautifully, undeniably free. The most valuable lesson I learned was this: true love cannot be bought, coerced, or earned through suffering. It must be freely given, freely received, and built on the unshakable foundation of truth.